According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women. And according to an analysis in the journal Lancet, this makes maternal mortality rate in the United States the worst in any industrialized country. And according to the Harvard School of Public Health, a significant portion of these deaths could have been prevented. But the question is, why not? Also, for decades, several HBCU medical schools have been single-handedly instrumental and responsible for producing the majority of African American doctors and medical professionals that ultimately return to their communities where they're from to serve it. So, is it time to expand resources for more HBCUs like Norfolk State University to offer these important opportunities to become a vital part of the profession to serve African American communities? This is State of Water, and I'm your host, award-winning Dr. Eric Claville. And this week, I had an opportunity to interview United States Senator Tim Kaine, junior senator from Virginia and former vice presidential nominee in 2016, to discuss legislation that he's championed to address these issues, along with funding to help provide for Norfolk State University and other agencies to give support to survivors of domestic violence. 757-823-9110. After the interview, we want to hear from you. What is your experience with giving birth? What are your thoughts about Norfolk State University adding a medical school? And are you a survivor of domestic violence? 757-823-9110. But now, U.S. Senator Tim Kaine. Today we have U.S. Senator Tim Kaine, who's a junior senator from the Commonwealth of Virginia and former vice presidential candidate in the 2016 presidential election. Thank you, Senator Kaine, for joining us.
Very good to be with you, Eric. Thanks so much.
Well, I know you're very busy. I know you're in the Capitol now. There's a lot of work going on, a lot of good work for the Commonwealth. We want to give you an opportunity to talk with the Hampton Roads community and NSU community about some of the great legislation that you're working on and things that are in the works.
Well, there's a lot in the works right now. Obviously, first, just the triple whammy of COVID and then the economic devastation caused by COVID, and then, the just completely visible and irrefutable evidence of racial injustice and the need to do something about it are hitting us all at the same time, and that means we've got to do more. We've in Congress passed 4 significant pieces of legislation to deal with COVID. We haven't done enough yet, and so as I'm talking to you today, I'm sitting here as we're working on trying to find a path forward on the next packages. But at least there was some recent positive news. We announced just a few days ago that Norfolk State was the recipient of a grant to help reduce domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking on campus. This has been a long-standing priority of mine as a member of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, Pension Committee. We worked on legislation to allow grant funding, and then Senator Warner and I were really happy to announce recently that Norfolk State received a $300,000 grant to deal with this in innovative ways on campus, and there was a similarly sized grant given to a domestic violence action alliance in Richmond.
Yes.
And these challenges get worse during tough times like now. Domestic violence, what we see is the stresses of life, whether it's economic stress, health stress, the need to quarantine and be indoors, often with a perpetrator of domestic violence, we start to see instances of domestic violence increase. So we were very happy to announce that Norfolk State, with an innovative proposal to help deal with this on campus, has received it. So that's some good news. And then on the legislation front, I'm fighting very hard for a bill that I've introduced with Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, bipartisan bill, with a House companion bill, Terry Sewell, the Democratic Congresswoman from Alabama, to try to deal with maternal health disparities. And you guys are so familiar with this because of the focus that you have on African American focused policy, but an African American woman has anywhere between 2 and 3 times the likelihood of dying during pregnancy or in the year after pregnancy of a Caucasian woman in this country. And you can measure that a little bit differently, but however you measure it, the racial disparity is just absolutely undeniable. And so after a series of roundtable sessions around Virginia and different communities, including Hampton Roads, we've introduced a bill to try to deal with these maternal disparities, through research, education, best practices, training of physicians and residents so that they will be more attuned to cultural differences and their own potential racial insensitivities. And we're trying to get the bill attached as part of this next COVID legislation because in July, the CDC added to the list of populations at risk from COVID pregnant and lactating women. They have a particular vulnerability to COVID, and so we view this maternal disparity bill as related to the work we're doing on COVID, and we're working hard to get it attached to the next piece of legislation.
These are all phenomenal legislative initiatives that you've introduced on the behalf of the Commonwealth and the people here. And one thing that we've found is that the pandemic has really exposed a lot of the inequities that we've kind of kicked the can down the proverbial road and ignored. So out of this pandemic, we see that there is a lot of great work coming down from a public policy standpoint. And in addition to that, Senator, there is a deficit in talking about healthcare of African Americans in the healthcare arena.
Absolutely.
We do know that persons are more likely to go to the hospital, have their doctors assigned to them, and really be transparent with their healthcare officials when they're talking to someone or dealing with someone that looks like them. Can you talk a little bit more about legislation that you're currently working on to establish more medical schools at HBCUs?
Absolutely, Eric. You stated very correctly. One of the elements of these disparities, whether it's maternal mortality, infant mortality, or other disparities, who's dying of COVID? Disproportionately African Americans. Who's getting COVID? Disproportionately Latinos and African Americans. And one of the factors is an absence of physicians and other healthcare providers of color. And there's just solid research that shows that the likelihood of a negative maternal or infant outcome is reduced just if the patient has a provider that is of the same race.
Wow.
The provider will be more sensitive. The patient may be more willing to share details that are necessary for the provider to do, everything that can be done to help somebody out. And so just that simple, it sounds simple, but it's not simple to get there. But just that simple thing, making sure that the health professions are more diverse, will bring down some of these disparities. So I introduced a bill that's very designed on in increasing the number of people of color in medical professions, but in particular medical schools in underserved areas. It's called the Expanding Medical Education Act, and it would provide grants through the HRSA, the Health Resources and Services Administration, to colleges and universities to establish either MD or osteopathic medical schools in underserved areas or at minority-serving institutions, including HBCUs. Underserved areas also include rural America, where often the number of physicians per population is so very, very low.
That's right.
So whether we're dealing with HBCUs, who we know have trained in the past and continue to, huge number of minority physicians, or whether we're focusing upon rural America, we've got to increase the diversity of our healthcare network and give more people more immediate access to healthcare from somebody who they can relate to.
Again, you hit the nail on the head with that. And right now, it's time to expand. I mean, this is our time. This is our effort to increase the diversity pool, increase access to medical care, and increase opportunity for individuals that really deserve it and need it. We're really excited about the work that you're doing for us on behalf of the Commonwealth. And in the last few moments that we have, this is 2020. Many people are saying this is the election of our lifetime.
I agree with them.
Not just for president, which you've been on that presidential trail before in 2016, but also the down ballots. In a few moments here, what words would you have for our voters and our listeners as it relates to this election in the Commonwealth?
Well, first, I think it's going to be the most important vote I will ever cast in my entire life, and I intend to live for a very long time. and you're right, I was on a national ticket 4 years ago. This vote is more important than that one. As important as that one was, I think this one is more important. I mean, I'll be blunt. I think the administration has horribly mishandled COVID and the economic devastation that follows. And with the recent revelations that President Trump knew how bad it was going to be, but then tried to downplay it and say it was going to go away, the U.S. lost critical time to fight this health scourge, and tens of thousands of needless deaths have resulted thereby. I know 4 people who've died of COVID, 2 African American and 2 Caucasian. And we're nearing 200,000 deaths. It was unnecessary. To compound it, since we're talking about health, shortly before the election, there's going to be a case argued in the Supreme Court, part of the Trump administration's continuing effort to repeal Obamacare and take health insurance away from tens of millions of people. And so I think the stakes just could not be higher. The good news is in Virginia in 2020, voting is easier than it has ever been. The legislature has made changes to allow early votes. For example, beginning Friday the 18th of September, you can go to your local registrar's office and vote in person. You can vote by mail, returning your ballot anytime after the 18th of September. You can ask for a ballot by mail, but then drop it off in person anytime after the 18th of September, either at your registrar's office or a drop box that your registrar will set up. Or you can vote in person on Election Day. You don't need an excuse to vote early, which Virginia used to require. Onerous voter ID requirements have been changed so that they don't stand as a complete obstacle in people's way. And then an important thing, Eric, is you can register to vote anytime up to October 13th. So if you try to vote early, that's like a little quality control measure, and somebody says, well, you moved or you're not able to vote, you can then fix it by October 13th, enabling your vote to still be counted if you vote on Election Day. So I think the stakes are incredibly high, maybe particularly around some of these healthcare issues we're talking about, but Virginia has now made it easier to vote than has been the case in the past. And I think, regardless, Democrat, Republican, Independent, who you plan to vote for, small d democracy wins when more people participate.
I couldn't have said it better myself. One of the greatest things about our country, we have many great things. One man, one vote, and the representative government that we have. Senator Tim Kaine, Junior Senator from the Commonwealth of Virginia, thank you so much for being on Stay to Water.
Always good to talk with Norfolk State. You guys do great work on public policy, dealing with the African-American community and so many other areas, and it's great to partner together with you.
Benita, so many great things that are happening in Washington on behalf of the Commonwealth.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you. Just what he said.
Yeah, it was great talking with our junior senator from the Commonwealth, Tim Kaine, and just about the things that are the legislation that he's putting in. I always say that the Commonwealth probably have the best representation in the Senate, but not just the Senate, but also in Hampton Roads.
Absolutely. And the more you hear about what's going on in our community and our Commonwealth, I feel even more proud to be a person that lives here.
Looks like we have a caller.
Absolutely.
Caller, you're on the air. This is Stay to Water.
I always say that the Commonwealth probably have the best representation in the Senate, but not just the Senate, but also in Hampton Roads. Absolutely.
All right. Looks like we're going to go back and the caller just called in. Please call back. We'll get you back on air. But as I was saying earlier, one thing about our representation is that they're listening to the people, listening to the causes, and it's just not anecdotal, but it's real policy in action to address these real issues.
These are real. This is where we live, work, and play, and these issues affect all of that. So that's really important. And it's so important also that, as Senator Tim Kaine said, these factors, especially maternal health, that's a critical issue.
It is. And you think about it, with African-American women being 3 to 4 times more likely to die giving birth,
right,
during birth, before birth, and then immediately afterwards, that's alarming. And it's really sad that even before now, not much has been done to really address that. But we see where this legislation not only gives it, a place in in our psyche in America, puts it at the forefront. This is the Black Lives Matter movement. It's more about police. Is more than just police brutality and police misconduct, but it's about Black Lives Mattering in the boardrooms, in the birth room,
right?
And all across every aspect of America. But think about that. I was reading a story the other day about African American women and the issue of dying during and before childbirth. And two stories that jumped out at me were the stories of Serena Williams and Beyonce.
Right. We were talking about that a little bit off air. Go ahead and tell our listeners about that.
Yeah. Well, before I do, I just want to give the number one more time. 757-823-9110. 757-823-9110. What is your story of giving birth to your child? Are you African American? Also, are you a survivor of domestic violence? And what are your thoughts about Norfolk State becoming a medical school and more opportunities from the federal government in order to give these opportunities to individuals to become doctors and medical professionals to serve their community? 757-823-9110. But Benita, I was talking earlier. Like I said, the two stories that jumped out at me was about Serena Williams and also Beyonce.
Right.
Now you have two of the most recognizable, women, not just Black women, but women in the world.
Absolutely.
You've got the great Serena Williams, who will go down as probably the greatest, if not, definitely the greatest woman, but if not the greatest tennis player to ever play the game. And also you have Beyonce, who sells out arenas, and everybody knows her music. But their stories were about them being recognizable, them having all the wealth that they have, but still being on the table and still after birth and possibly losing their lives. Serena Williams herself, she said that she had a condition that she lives with, and it's where blood clots can happen in your body. And after she gave birth, the day after, she raised that issue to her medical professionals, the doctors and nurses, and they just dismissed it. I mean, this is something that she's been living with, and they just dismissed it. And she was gasping for breath, and there was a blood clot in her lungs, and she almost could have died. Not because she was poor, not because she wasn't educated, not because she didn't know her medical history, but because she was dismissed.
She was dismissed. And we were saying, can you imagine Serena or Beyonce, but can you imagine a woman when no one knows her name? She is not wealthy. She is not recognized by medical professionals. And if those two can be dismissed, you absolutely know that other type of woman could be dismissed. And that's scary to me.
It is. That's why it's so important that when we fight for rights, we fight for public policy and access. We can't leave anyone behind. This public policy affects everyone, and this legislation is key to addressing those very important issues. 757-823-9110. 757-823-9110. Today, we're talking about your experience giving birth. Did you have any complications? What was your experience with your doctor? Do you think that this legislation goes far enough? Also, are you a survivor of domestic violence? What type of support did you need or do you need in order to deal with that experience? And finally, are you excited about the opportunity to expand funding to open up resources for medical professional schools here in Hampton Roads? 757-823-9110. And, one thing that we were discussing, Benita, is that, we find where, and I've mentioned this to the senator as well, we find where people feel more comfortable dealing with individuals that have their experience, individuals that look like them.
That's right.
Individuals that really understand where they come from, right?
And you're right about that. Someone who knows who they are. Perhaps they've had, just like you said, they might have had the same experience. They get it, and especially I always talk about with children they can aspire to be something when they see that professional, an engineer, a doctor, a teacher, a lawyer, whatever it is that person looks like them, and that is one of the reasons why it's so important.
You take me back to my childhood when I decided to go into the legal profession and I thought about it. I said, I've got all these African American men around me who are actually professionals. So it does have an effect. But right now we have a caller. Okay. Yeah. So
so that is why you went into the legal profession.
Exactly, because again, you see individuals that look like you see individuals that have achieved certain things, and again, it just only helps to see those individuals so that you too can achieve.
Oh, absolutely. You need to see that.
So it's not about prejudice or racism, but it's about being able to relate.
Absolutely.
Caller, you're on the air. This is State of the Water.
Yes, hi. My name is Linda, and I was calling in because about the childbirth.
Yes.
It happened to me like 27 years ago when I had my last child, the baby girl. When I first was going to the hospital, I had what they call placenta previa, but I hadn't been diagnosed with it until it was actually happening to me. So I was hemorrhaging, and at first they thought it was an artery, and then my GYN said, no, it is her uterus. So after giving birth, C-section, they had to go back in, take out my uterus. So that was like 2 major operations back to back.
Oh, my gosh.
I was not supposed to survive. My GYN doctor told me God was there with you. It was so many things. And what the whole thing stemmed from was because my uterus, my cervix actually had a tear that went undiagnosed before my pregnancy. It was a tear there. And that's why when the baby was getting heavy, I started to bleed.
Oh.
And it was the scariest moment in my life, but honestly, it's my privilege now to be talking to you now. And like I said, it happened 27 years ago.
Wow.
But so many things went undiagnosed, starting with the tear in the cervix. That was the most important thing, because had I known that, then me and my husband wouldn't have gotten pregnant so soon until that healed.
Wow. Now, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And we're so glad that you are here speaking with us here on State of the Water about your experience. I do have a follow-up question for you.
Okay.
When you say that the tear went undiagnosed, were you did you have a good relationship with your OBGYN and your primary care physician before going through this process?
Yes, because as a matter of fact, I had a baby a year before I got pregnant with my last child. I had a son. And I guess during that pregnancy was when the tear in the cervix happened, because I had a blood clot. Oh. And when they went in to take out that blood clot, my cervix was torn. And like I said, if he had just told me that, then we wouldn't have gotten pregnant so soon afterwards. We were trying to space our children 2 years apart.
Wow. Thank you again for calling and sharing your story.
Thank you.
That's just another example, Benita, of, again, not really going in depth on the care. She says she had a good relationship with her OBGYN and primary care physician, but still, it was missed.
Absolutely. And again, those are some of the fears that especially women of color face all the time. And it's interesting and almost scary sometimes when you say they're not listening to me. They're not. I've told them one thing, but they're not listening. So you have no doubt as to why there's sometimes this suspicion in the African American community when it comes to the medical professional.
When you talk about suspicion in African Americans and the medical history, we have to go back through history. Right?
Oh, we do, of course.
We look at statistics and we look at studies, but we forget that there's a historical context to all the mistrust that happens. But right now we have another caller on the line.
Absolutely. So we see what's going on out there, and it's really important. And we appreciate our listeners being there for us. So I had a caller once, a person on my show once to talk about medical apartheid. Do you hear that? That's an amazing thing.
Oh, wow. Caller, you're on the air. This is State of the Water.
Yes. I was listening to your program. Great program, by the way. I just wanted to follow up with one of the comments that were made regarding having a medical people in the medical profession that look like you.
Yes.
And that's such a great point and a wonderful point. But I just also wanted to add to it, it's not so much that they look like me that is a help. It's the fact that they have lived and shared experiences as I do in this world. And it's that nuanced understanding of culture and how we've been trickled through life and some of the obstacles, types of food we eat, type of way we're corrected as young people. All of those things build in together. And there is an understanding that's just built in from those lived-in experiences that is just so hugely important, and that helps with them assisting me medically. I had to go to a counselor, and I went to several different ones, and they just weren't getting me. And then I went to a black counselor, and they got it. And it wasn't so much that the books or the degree taught them anything to relate to me better, but it was that lived experience. So I just wanted to add that and congratulate you guys on a great program.
Thank you so much, caller. That is a phenomenal point. And we were just talking about the history when you mentioned medical apartheid, because there's a lot that goes into the African American experience. And one great thing about Norfolk State University and many great things, but the Making of America Summit, 1619. Where this history was brought to the forefront. The history that's been forgotten, the history that's been suppressed.
Right.
Intentionally suppressed.
I was going to say intentionally. I was definitely going to say that one.
Just so that we can understand that African Americans not just exist in a silo, but we exist all in the country, in all the fabric of the country. And just understanding that, hey, I grew up on this side of the track and we ate this type of food because this is what we ate, on Sundays, or we actually played these types of games, or we actually had this type of family structure. It's very important.
It really is. And so there's more than one Black experience, and that's important. And yet sometimes, even with those different experiences, some things, as our callers were saying, it affects us all in similar ways. If we are not taken seriously, if no one is listening, if we are afraid, we can experience that together, and we many times have.
You're right. And I want to point out, go back to the history. You mentioned medical apartheid.
Right.
But we can't forget about, not just the Tuskegee experiment, which was 40 years of purposefully the government injecting African-American men with syphilis.
The syphilis, right.
And watching the effects of syphilis upon them and how it deteriorates their minds. And what we really don't talk about in that study, Benita, are the women that they infected when they went back home, and the different diseases and complications that they had. But also we got to go back a little bit further. And when we're talking about women's health, so we got to talk about who we coined as being the father of gynecology. How he purchased, so many female African women who were slaves.
Yes, for sure.
And performed experiments upon them that are still used to this day for medical procedures. And he did it without anesthesia.
Can you even imagine that? It's even hard to fathom that kind of thing could happen, and yet it did.
It is. And again, that's part of the history that we don't talk about. And then I have to give a shout out to Fannie Lou Hamer and the other women, that were forcefully their reproductive organs they were sterilized. They were
sterilized, yeah.
So they could not give birth, without their permission. So there are so many different things that happen to African Americans, African American men and women, and then just our people, to where there is a mistrust.
There is.
So these stories just are not anecdotal. But they are real.
And when you made that connection, Eric, between Black Lives Matter, it's way more than just marching in the street. Lives in terms of women's health, lives in terms of education, housing, economically. That is what we're talking about when we say Black Lives Matter. All of the aspects of our lives.
That's it. The boardroom, the birthing room,
right?
All across, in banking, in finance. Not just in entertainment,
yes.
But even in entertainment, not just the performances, but also those who are movers and shakers, investors, and so forth. So hats off to all the athletes that are using their voices, for social change and real change. This is a phenomenon that we saw in the 60s, of course, with Jim Brown and others, Bill Russell, Muhammad Ali, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and many others that stood up. But now we're seeing an entire leagues say, hey,
right,
this is something that we have to really talk about if we're going to have our society be what we really want it to be.
And I agree with, very quickly, Senator Kaine, what he was saying. This is one of the most important elections, perhaps, that he's ever been a part of, perhaps, and many of us have been a part of. This matters very much this time.
And Benita, that's saying a lot because, he was the vice presidential nominee along with Hillary Clinton in 2016. So one thing I talked to Senator Kaine about, is that he was on the trail. And we talked outside of this particular call and other occasions. And, him being on the trail, he knows what it's like. He knows what it's like to campaign. He knows what it's like to speak to the people. He knows what it's like to see the pain and the hurt and the aspirations of individuals' lives, not just in the Commonwealth, but across the country.
Right. He has the pulse. He has seen it. You're right.
Yes. 757-823-9110. 757-823-9110. We have a few moments left if you want to tell us your story. But at this particular time, we want to encourage you to listen in and tune in every Sunday at 1:30 to 2 o'clock on Stay the Water here on 91.1 FM, Blazing Hot.